A shy teenager's life is turned upside down when his loyal Pitbull leaps to his defense, saving him from a school bully. But as the dog faces a life-or-death decision, will their bond be enough to overcome the prejudice threatening to tear them apart? Miguel trudged along the cracked pavement leading to his school, his backpack weighing heavier than usual on his thin shoulders. The sky above mirrored his mood, a dismal, overcast gray that pressed down as if in silent solidarity with his struggles. He kept his head low, his unruly black hair falling into his eyes, a convenient shield against the sneering faces he'd inevitably encounter. Life for Miguel was a monotonous loop of avoidance. In the mornings, he would silently prepare for school, while his mother worked the early shift at the hospital. By the time he left the house, the silence had already wrapped itself around him like an old, tattered coat. But there was one bright spot in Miguel's life: Max, his loyal Pitbull. Max was waiting for him at the gate, as he did every single morning. His sleek brown coat gleamed even in the dim light, and his expressive eyes lit up the moment they spotted Miguel. The dog's tail wagged furiously, a metronome of joy that always managed to tug a small smile from his owner. "Hey, buddy," Miguel muttered, dropping to his knees and ruffling Max's ears. For a moment, the weight on his shoulders lightened. Max leaned into him, his warmth a silent promise that no matter what, Miguel was never truly alone. At school, things were different. The corridors were a gauntlet of ridicule and sneers. Tomas and his gang loomed like storm clouds, their voices sharp and cutting. Miguel had learned long ago that retaliation was futile. He endured their taunts in silence, his jaw clenched, his fingers gripping the straps of his backpack as though holding on to the only stability in his world. Lunchtime offered little reprieve. Miguel sat alone at the corner table in the cafeteria, picking at his food and pretending not to notice the amused whispers and sidelong glances thrown his way. His escape came in the form of daydreams, imagining himself as someone else, someone stronger, more confident, and unbothered by the jeers of his peers. The end of the school day couldn't come fast enough. As the final bell rang, Miguel gathered his things and slipped out, eager to find solace in the one place where he felt truly safe. Outside, Max was waiting for him again, his excitement undiminished by the long hours apart. "Let's go home," Miguel said softly, his voice barely audible over the chatter of students pouring out of the building. Max fell into step beside him, his presence a silent guardian against the world. Back at their small, modest house, Miguel unwound in Max's company. The dog followed him from room to room, a constant shadow. In the evenings, Miguel would sit on the porch steps, Max's head resting on his lap, the two of them gazing at the fading light. The quiet between them was comfortable, a shared understanding that needed no words. Miguel often wondered how he'd survive without Max. The dog wasn't just his pet. He was his confidant, his protector, his anchor. While the world outside felt harsh and unforgiving, Max's unwavering loyalty reminded him that there was still goodness to be found. The routine repeated itself day after day. While others might see monotony, for Miguel, it was a lifeline. Each morning began with Max's joyful greeting, and each evening ended with his comforting presence. Max was the thread holding Miguel's life together, a bond so deep and enduring it seemed unbreakable. But as Miguel drifted off to sleep that night, Max curled at his feet. He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that change was coming. He didn't know when or how, but something in the air felt different, a tension building, waiting to snap. For now, though, Miguel allowed himself the small comfort of the moment, his hand resting on Max's back, rising and falling with each steady breath. The school courtyard buzzed with its usual midday energy, laughter, shouts, and the occasional sound of sneakers scuffing against concrete. Miguel stood near the edge of the crowd, trying to make himself as inconspicuous as possible. He clutched his lunch tray tightly, scanning for a quiet spot where he could eat in peace. Before he could move, a familiar voice called out, sharp and mocking. "Hey, Miguel, where are you sneaking off to?" Miguel froze. Tomas. He turned slowly, his stomach sinking. Tomas and his group of friends were sauntering toward him, their predatory smiles unmistakable. Tomas was tall and broad for his age, his self-assured swagger amplified by the laughter of his entourage. Miguel wanted to disappear, but his feet wouldn't obey. "You're always so quiet," Tomas sneered, grabbing the edge of Miguel's tray. "What's in here? Let me guess. Something as boring as you?" He flipped the tray with a sudden jerk, sending the food splattering across the ground. The group burst into laughter, the sound echoing across the courtyard. Miguel's face burned, but he didn't move to retaliate. He knew better. Instead, he knelt to gather the mess, his trembling hands betraying the humiliation he tried to hide. But Thomas wasn't finished. "Oh no, don't stop now," he taunted, kicking Miguel's backpack. The contents spilled out, crumpled notebooks, a tattered sketch pad, and a pencil case that had seen better days. Tomas picked up the sketch pad, flipping through its pages. "Look at this," he said, holding it up for the others. "Drawing dogs now, huh? Guess that makes sense. A loser like you probably only has a dog for a friend." Miguel lunged forward, desperate to snatch the sketch pad back, but one of the others shoved him hard. He stumbled, landing on his hands and knees. The laughter grew louder, sharper, cutting into him like knives. Beyond the gate, Max's sharp bark cut through the chaos. Miguel turned his head, spotting the dog pacing back and forth. His ears pricked, his eyes locked on the commotion. Max's agitation was evident. His growls carried a warning that even from a distance seemed impossible to ignore. "Look at him," one of Tomas's friends jeered, pointing at the dog. "It's like he knows how pathetic you are." Tomas smirked but didn't engage with the comment. Instead, he leaned closer to Miguel, who was still on the ground, his hands clenched into fists. "Maybe if you barked like your dog, people would notice you more." The words stung, but Miguel said nothing. He forced himself to meet Tomas's gaze for a brief moment, his chest tightening with frustration and shame. Max's barking intensified, growing more frantic. Miguel turned toward the gate, wishing he could somehow communicate to Max that it was fine. He could handle this. But the truth was, he couldn't. Tomas shoved the sketchpad into Miguel's chest, the pages bent and smudged. "Clean up your mess, mutt lover," he said with a sneer before walking away, his group trailing behind, their laughter still ringing in Miguel's ears. The courtyard returned to its usual rhythm, but Miguel stayed frozen, his body trembling as he picked up his scattered belongings. Behind the gate, Max continued to bark, his cries a painful echo of the turmoil inside Miguel's chest. Miguel sat on the ground, the remnants of his lunch and scattered books all around him. His hands trembled as he wiped his eyes, embarrassed by the tears that had escaped. He didn't want to give Tomas the satisfaction of seeing him break. His heart felt heavy, the sting of the insults lingering like a weight on his chest. Max's barking had slowed, but the dog's presence still echoed in Miguel's mind. Miguel glanced over at the gate again, hoping Max would sense his distress, but the Pitbull was still pacing back and forth, his ears flat against his head, his body tense. There was something in the dog's movements that told Miguel he wasn't the only one hurting. But as Miguel finally began to gather his belongings, something shifted. The courtyard noise faded into the background, drowned out by the loud, rapid thumping of his heart. He heard the unmistakable sound of the school's front gate rattling, a low, creaking groan of metal. In an instant, Max surged forward, his body launching over the gate with surprising speed and agility. The sound of claws scraping against metal echoed through the courtyard as the dog's muscles tensed, pushing him up and over the barrier. Before anyone could react, Max landed on the other side with a thud, standing between Miguel and the rest of the students, his stance protective and unwavering. Miguel's heart skipped a beat, a strange mix of panic and awe coursing through him. "Max!" he cried, but his voice was drowned out by the gasps of the students. The entire courtyard fell silent for a split second, as if everyone had collectively held their breath. Max stood his ground, facing Tomas and his group with his hackles raised, his tail straight, and his lips drawn back in a low, menacing growl. He wasn't attacking, he wasn't even advancing, but there was no mistaking the warning in his posture. Max was protecting Miguel, and there was no doubt in anyone's mind. Tomas stepped back, looking slightly stunned, but his bravado returned quickly. "What the hell is this?" he sneered. "You think your dog can protect you, freak?" The other students hung back, unsure of what to do. Max's steady gaze was locked on Tomas, and for the first time, Miguel saw the true power in the bond they shared. Max wasn't just Miguel's dog, he was his guardian. Despite the intimidation in Max's posture, Miguel could see that the dog wasn't trying to attack, only to keep them at bay. Max was standing between Miguel and danger, a silent sentinel. Miguel slowly rose to his feet, his knees wobbling slightly. His voice, weak at first, grew stronger as he called out, "Max, it's okay. You don't need to do this." He reached out slowly, hoping the dog would understand, hoping he could calm the situation. Max's ears perked up, and after a moment of hesitation, he relaxed his stance just slightly, though his eyes never left Tomas and his group. It was as if he was waiting for Miguel's command. The tension in the courtyard was palpable, the quiet hanging thick in the air. The students watched, some whispering among themselves, others frozen in place. Even the teachers who had begun to approach hesitated, unsure of how to handle the situation. Tomas glared at Miguel, his face a mask of both anger and confusion. He took a step forward, but Max growled louder, a deep rumbling sound that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. Miguel stepped closer to Max, his hand brushing gently along the dog's back. "We're fine," he whispered, his voice a steady murmur, like a prayer. Max, as if hearing the reassurance in Miguel's voice, took a final look at Tomas and his group, then turned back to Miguel, his body relaxing. For a moment, the courtyard remained still, the quiet stretching longer than it should. The tension, however, hadn't quite dissipated. Max had done what Miguel never could have. He'd taken control of the situation and sent a clear message. The power dynamic in the courtyard had shifted in an instant. As the other students slowly began to scatter, murmurs of awe and fear rising around them, Miguel realized something that made his heart soar. Max had just shown him what it meant to be brave. He had taken a stand, not just for himself, but for his best friend. And Miguel, for the first time in a long while, felt a spark of hope flicker inside him. The chaos of the courtyard had barely subsided when the principal arrived, followed by a couple of teachers. Their eyes darted between Miguel, Max, and Tomas, trying to piece together what had just happened. Max, still standing protectively in front of Miguel, remained tense, his gaze shifting from the adults to the group of students who had gathered at the edges of the courtyard. "Miguel, step back," Principal Rodriguez called out, her voice firm but not unkind. Miguel didn't move immediately. He wanted to stay close to Max, who was the only one who seemed to understand him, the only one who had ever stood up for him. "Now, Miguel," the principal urged again, "we need to get you inside." Reluctantly, Miguel took a few hesitant steps back, but his eyes never left Max. The Pitbull didn't move, his eyes still locked on Tomas and his friends, as though daring them to take another step. "Is that your dog?" Principal Rodriguez asked, her tone shifting to one of concern. "Yes," Miguel replied, his voice quiet but steady. "His name is Max." The principal nodded, then turned to one of the teachers who had arrived with her. "Call animal control. We can't risk the dog being here if it's aggressive." Miguel's stomach dropped at her words. "Aggressive?" he repeated, his voice trembling despite his efforts to stay composed. The principal looked at him, a faint frown on her face. "It's a pit bull, Miguel. We can't ignore that this is a dangerous breed, especially with what just happened." Before Miguel could respond, the animal control officers arrived, followed by the police. The crowd of students had grown larger, whispering among themselves as the scene unfolded. Miguel's hands clenched into fists at his sides. This wasn't how he had imagined things would go. Max had been trying to protect him, yet now the dog was being treated like the villain. "They're going to take him away?" Miguel asked, his voice small, barely above a whisper. Principal Rodriguez gave a regretful sigh. "We have to follow procedure. We can't have animals like this on school property, especially after what happened today." Miguel's heart pounded in his chest as two animal control officers approached Max cautiously. The pit bull, still standing firm between Miguel and the others, growled low in his throat. The officers hesitated but moved closer, speaking softly to the dog, trying to calm him. Max's posture remained defensive, but he didn't attack. He wasn't attacking anyone. He was just trying to protect his owner. "We're taking him," one of the officers said firmly. "He'll be placed in quarantine until the situation is assessed." Miguel's eyes welled with tears, but he fought them back, unwilling to break down in front of everyone. "He didn't do anything wrong," he said, his voice quivering. "Max just wanted to protect me." Tomas, standing nearby, smirked. "Maybe the freak and his dog can get a taste of their own medicine," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for Miguel to hear. The words cut deeper than any insult had before, but Miguel was too overwhelmed to react. As the officers led Max away, Miguel felt a wave of helplessness wash over him. He had done nothing wrong, and yet everything was spiraling out of control. It wasn't fair. Max had been his lifeline, the one constant in his life, and now he was being taken away. The whispers around him grew louder, but Miguel could no longer focus on them. His mind was spinning, consumed with worry about Max. What would happen to him now? What would he do without his only real friend? The school bell rang, signaling the end of the day, but Miguel couldn't bring himself to move. He sat on the cold steps of the school, staring out at the empty courtyard where Max had been taken. The weight of his thoughts pressed down on him, and the world felt unbearably heavy. How could he face another day at school knowing that his dog, his best friend, was locked away somewhere, unable to defend himself or be by his side? "Hey, Miguel." The voice was soft, but it carried through the air, pulling Miguel from his spiral of thoughts. He turned to find Sophia standing at the top of the steps, her eyes kind but uncertain. Sophia wasn't exactly one of his close friends, but she had always been kind to him. She'd never been part of the group that taunted him, and there had been times when she had quietly sat near him in class, offering a small smile. Miguel didn't respond at first. He didn't know how to speak, not when everything felt so wrong. Sophia hesitated, then slowly sat down beside him on the step. I saw what happened," she said quietly, her voice full of empathy. "I'm sorry. That was really messed up." Miguel nodded, unable to form words. His throat felt tight, the lump of frustration and helplessness lodged deep inside him. He wanted to tell her everything, how Max had always been there for him, how he had never asked for any of this, but he couldn't. Instead, he just stared down at his shoes. "I know it's not much," Sophia continued, "but if you need someone to talk to, I'm here. I know what it's like, feeling like everyone's against you. I've been there." Miguel blinked, surprised by her words. He hadn't expected her to understand, but somehow, her openness made him feel a little less alone. "Really?" he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophia nodded. "Yeah, I've had my fair share of bullying too. People can be really cruel sometimes." She looked at him, her eyes serious but kind. "I know Max didn't mean any harm. He was just trying to protect you. But the school, well, they don't see it that way." Miguel's chest tightened. "So what do I do now? They're going to keep him locked up and I can't even explain to them that he was just trying to help." Sophia paused, then placed a hand on his shoulder. "I think we can do something about it. We can make them see the truth about Max. We can show them how much he means to you and how he's not dangerous. But we'll have to fight for him." Miguel looked up at her, a mix of surprise and hope flickering in his eyes. "You'd help me?" "Of course," Sophia said, giving him a small smile. "I don't like seeing people get treated unfairly. And I think you and Max deserve a chance. We'll figure it out together." For the first time all day, Miguel felt a small spark of hope flicker inside him. He hadn't been alone in his struggle. Sophia, a stranger in many ways, was offering him the support he needed. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to get Max back. "I don't know how to thank you," Miguel said quietly. "You don't have to thank me," Sophia replied. "We're in this together now." As the last of the students filtered out of the school, Miguel and Sophia sat together quietly plotting the next steps. It was going to be a long road ahead, but for the first time in a long time, Miguel felt like he wasn't fighting alone anymore. Miguel barely slept that night. His mind kept racing with the events of the day. Max being taken away, the frustration of not being able to do anything about it, and the fear that he might never see his dog again. But Sophia's words echoed in his mind. "We can make them see the truth about Max." For the first time, Miguel felt like there was a chance. He wasn't alone in this fight, and that small reassurance made the weight on his chest feel a little lighter. The next morning at school, Miguel was barely able to focus on anything. As he walked through the hallways, the whispers seemed louder than usual, their sharp tones reminding him of what had happened the day before. Tomas's mocking face flashed in his mind. His taunts still stung, but Miguel was determined not to let it stop him from fighting for Max. As he approached his locker, he saw Sophia waiting for him, her face serious, but with a quiet determination in her eyes. "You ready?" she asked, her voice calm but resolute. "I guess," Miguel replied, unsure. He had no idea where to start. "But I don't know how we're supposed to change everyone's mind. I mean, they all saw what happened. How do we convince them that Max wasn't the problem?" Sophia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's going to take time, but we have to start somewhere. First, we need to get more information. There's something I've been thinking about." Miguel raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I've been doing some thinking about Tomas," she said. "I know we don't exactly get along, but there's something off about him. Have you noticed how he reacts when it comes to dogs?" He's always making comments about Max. I don't think it's just because he's a bully. Miguel thought back to the moments when Tomas had taunted him, and Sofia's words clicked in his mind. Tomas had never just insulted Max. He'd always gone a step further, as if something about Max set him off in a way that didn't make sense. "What do you think is going on with him?" Miguel asked, curiosity tinged with a faint sense of dread. "I don't know for sure," Sofia said, her eyes scanning the hallway as if she were searching for something. "But I remember something. A few years ago, I overheard a conversation between some of the older students. They were talking about Tomas, and there was a mention of a dog attack. I don't know the details, but I think it happened when he was younger." Miguel's stomach churned. He hadn't thought about it that way, but it made sense. Tomas's extreme hatred toward dogs, especially pit bulls, seemed more personal than just casual teasing. It could be that Max's very presence triggered some deep-rooted fear or trauma that Miguel had never considered. "So you think he's afraid of dogs because of something that happened to him?" Miguel asked, his voice soft with the realization. "Exactly," Sofia replied. "And that's why he's been going after Max the way he has. He's projecting his fear onto your dog, even though Max hasn't done anything to him." Miguel's mind raced. If this was true, then maybe he could use it to his advantage. Maybe he could help Tomas face whatever fear or trauma had been holding him back. But Miguel wasn't sure if Tomas would even listen to him. After everything that had happened, it seemed impossible that the bully who had tormented him for so long could be reached. "You think I should talk to him about it?" Miguel asked hesitantly. Sofia nodded. "Maybe, but it won't be easy. He's got a lot of pride, and he might not open up right away. But if you want to make this right for Max, and for you, you need to try." Miguel sighed. The thought of confronting Tomas, the person who had caused him so much pain, filled him with a mixture of anger and fear. But he also realized that Sofia was right. If there was even a chance of understanding Tomas's actions, it might help him not only fight for Max's return, but also uncover the truth behind Tomas's cruelty. "I'll try," Miguel said, his voice firm with newfound resolve. "It's time I stop running from everything, even the people who make me scared." Sofia smiled. "That's the spirit. We've got this, Miguel. One step at a time." With a deep breath, Miguel set his gaze forward. The path ahead seemed daunting, but for the first time he felt like he had a plan. He wasn't just fighting for Max, he was fighting for himself too. Miguel spent the next few days in a haze of determination and quiet anxiety. The school had become a battleground, not just for Max's return, but for his own peace of mind. As he walked the hallways, he no longer tried to avoid the whispers or the stares. He had a purpose now. He was no longer just a victim of the bullying. He was fighting for something that mattered more than anything: Max. He and Sofia began their plan. They started gathering signatures from students who understood that Max wasn't a threat, but a protector. Many were hesitant at first, not wanting to get involved in the controversy. But as Miguel and Sofia shared stories about how Max had always been gentle and loyal, the tide began to turn. Slowly, students began to come forward, each one adding their name to a petition that Miguel hoped would be enough to make a difference. One afternoon, during lunch, Miguel stood up at the front of the cafeteria, his heart racing in his chest. Sofia stood beside him, offering silent support. The students fell silent, turning their attention to him. "I know you've all heard about what happened with Max," Miguel began, his voice steady despite the fear that bubbled in his chest. "And I know some of you think that he's dangerous, but I'm here to tell you that he's not. He was just trying to protect me." Miguel paused, gathering his thoughts. "I've been bullied by people like Tomas for a long time. And Max is the only one who has ever stood up for me. The only one who's never judged me. He's not a threat. He's a dog who loves his owner, and he did what any loyal friend would do. He protected me." There was a moment of silence before a few students began to nod, murmuring among themselves. The message was slowly getting through. Miguel's voice wavered as he continued. "I'm asking you all to help me bring Max back. He's not just my dog. He's family, and he deserves to be here, with me." Sofia stepped forward then, her voice confident. "We've started a petition to have Max return to Miguel. We've got a lot of signatures already, but we need more support. If you believe in what we're saying, we ask you to stand with us." Miguel watched as students began to approach, signing their names on the petition. It was slow at first, but the momentum was building. A few of the quieter students who had always kept to themselves came forward, expressing their support. The atmosphere in the cafeteria shifted, and for the first time in a long time, Miguel felt like he wasn't alone in this fight. But Tomas wasn't going to let this go without a fight of his own. By the end of the day, Miguel had heard that Tomas had gathered his own group of supporters, including some of the teachers who had always believed that pit bulls were inherently dangerous. He wasn't going to let Max's return happen without a challenge. The conflict was intensifying. That afternoon, Miguel walked home with Sofia by his side. They discussed their next steps, trying to figure out how to get more people involved. It was clear that this wasn't going to be easy. Tomas and his group weren't going to back down without a fight, and neither was Miguel. He wasn't going to let them win. When he arrived home, Miguel sat at his desk and began writing. He wrote a heartfelt letter, one that he poured his emotions into, explaining what Max meant to him. He wrote about the nights when Max would sleep by his side, about the way Max always knew when he needed comfort, and about how, despite everything, the dog had never judged him. He wrote about the importance of loyalty and love, of standing up for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Miguel signed the letter, then placed it into an envelope. He would take it to the school the next day, along with the petition, to present to the principal and the authorities. He was ready to fight for Max, ready to show them that the dog wasn't the danger everyone thought he was. As Miguel sat back in his chair, he realized that this fight was more than just for Max's return. It was a fight for his own dignity, for his own voice to be heard. And no matter how difficult it became, he wasn't going to give up. The day of the meeting arrived. Miguel stood in front of the school, his heart racing, a knot of nervous anticipation lodged deep in his stomach. The petition he had worked so hard to gather, along with his heartfelt letter about Max, were clutched tightly in his hands. Sofia stood beside him, her presence a quiet strength as they waited for the principal to arrive and call them into the meeting room. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The principal, several teachers, and even some parents who were concerned about Max's behavior had gathered to discuss the fate of the dog. Tomas and his parents were also there, their expressions hard and unyielding. Miguel's mind raced. What if they didn't listen? What if all of this was for nothing? But then, he remembered Max, and the way the dog had stood by his side when no one else had. That thought grounded him, and he felt the tension in his chest ease just a little. "Good afternoon, everyone," Principal Rodriguez began, her voice carrying through the room. "We're here to discuss the situation regarding Miguel's dog, Max. As you all know, there have been concerns about the dog's behavior after the incident in the courtyard. We need to decide if Max should be allowed to return to school." Miguel stood up, his hands shaking, but he didn't let the fear stop him. He cleared his throat and stepped forward, holding up the petition and the letter. "I'm here to speak for Max," Miguel said, his voice steady despite the nerves that threatened to betray him. "Max wasn't a threat. He was only trying to protect me. He's not a dangerous dog. He's loyal, kind, and gentle. He's been my only true friend for a long time." There was a slight murmur among the group. Tomas's father raised his hand to interrupt, but Principal Rodriguez gave him a look, signaling that she would allow Miguel to finish. "I understand that some people are afraid of pit bulls," Miguel continued. "But not all pit bulls are bad. Max has never hurt anyone. He only did what any loyal dog would do. He stood up for me. I know he's not a threat, and I want to prove that to you." Miguel handed over the petition, hoping that the signatures would help make his case. He also gave the principal the letter he had written, his words sincere and filled with the emotions he had carried for so long. Tomas, sitting at the table with his parents, crossed his arms over his chest. "You don't get it, Miguel," he said coldly. "That dog attacked me. I'm not going to just forget that." Miguel's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't back down. "Max never attacked you, Tomas. He was just trying to stop you from hurting me." The room fell silent as the tension between the two boys grew. Principal Rodriguez looked between them, her expression thoughtful. After a long pause, she spoke. "I've heard both sides, and I understand the concerns. However, we need to make a decision that is fair to everyone. I believe that Max deserves a chance, and we can implement safety measures, such as a trial period where Max is allowed back under strict supervision." Miguel's heart soared. "You mean, he can come back?" The principal nodded. "Yes, but only if all parties agree to certain conditions. Max will need to be evaluated by a professional to ensure that he poses no danger. And if there's any sign of aggression, he will be removed." Miguel couldn't believe what he was hearing. Max could come back, It wasn't a guarantee yet, but it was a start. "Thank you," Miguel whispered, his voice thick with emotion. As the meeting adjourned, Miguel walked out of the room, Sofia by his side. The decision wasn't final, but it was the first step toward getting Max back where he belonged. Miguel felt a weight lift off his shoulders as he realized that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. The following week, Miguel's heart pounded with anticipation as the final decision regarding Max was set to be made. The school had allowed the evaluation to take place, and a professional animal behaviorist had confirmed that Max was, indeed, a gentle and well-behaved dog with no signs of aggression. Principal Rodriguez stood in front of the school courtyard, holding a small gathering to announce the outcome. Miguel stood to the side, his nerves betraying his calm exterior. Beside him, Sofia offered a reassuring smile. After careful consideration and evaluation, the principal began, her voice steady but filled with a slight warmth. "The decision has been made to allow Max back on school grounds, effective immediately. We believe that Max deserves a chance to return, as long as both Miguel and Max adhere to certain guidelines, including supervision while on the premises." The crowd of students, teachers, and parents stood in stunned silence before a wave of applause erupted, filling the courtyard with a sense of relief and triumph. Miguel's eyes filled with tears as he looked over at Sofia, her encouraging smile now mirrored on his own face. The battle wasn't over yet, but they had won this victory. Just then, the school gate opened, and a familiar figure trotted through, Max wagging his tail and looking around eagerly. Miguel's heart swelled as the dog bounded toward him, his loyal companion once more by his side. "Max!" Miguel whispered, bending down to hug the dog. As Max licked his face, Miguel whispered again, this time to himself, "We made it." The days that followed Max's return were filled with a newfound sense of peace. Miguel walked through the halls of the school with his head held higher, no longer shrinking away from the eyes that had once judged him. The whispers had faded, replaced by soft smiles and nods of approval. He could feel the change, not just in the way others looked at him, but in the way he looked at himself. Max, ever the loyal companion, accompanied him every morning, walking confidently beside him as if nothing had ever happened. The bond they shared had only grown stronger, a bond that had been tested but never broken. Each day, Miguel felt a little more at ease, a little more like he belonged. Tomas surprisingly approached Miguel one afternoon, his posture stiff and guarded. I wanted to apologize," he said, his voice quieter than Miguel had ever heard it. "I was wrong about Max and about you. I was just scared." Miguel, taken aback by the apology, nodded slowly. "It's okay," he said, his voice soft. "I understand." And with that, the animosity that had once defined their interactions seemed to fade away, leaving space for something unexpected, a tentative understanding. As Miguel sat on the porch at home that evening, Max curled up beside him. He reflected on the journey they had been through together. The battles, the struggles, and the fear had all led to this moment. Max had been his protector, his friend, his constant in a world that had often been uncertain. Now Miguel could face the future with the confidence he'd never had before. There would be challenges ahead, but for the first time, Miguel felt ready for them. With Max by his side, anything was possible. In the end, Miguel's journey teaches us that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about standing up for what's right, even when the world seems determined to keep you down. The bond between Miguel and Max proves that true strength comes from loyalty, love, and the willingness to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. It's a reminder that sometimes we all need to find the courage to stand up against the unfairness around us, and that even the smallest act of bravery can lead to monumental change. How would you have reacted if you were in Miguel's shoes? Would you have the courage to face the bullies and stand up for your friend? Or would you have given in to the pressure? Click on the video on the screen to continue your journey of self-discovery and find the strength within yourself to overcome life's challenges. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that will